Captain Evan Drake couldn't feel his fingers anymore. The cold that seeped through the cracked metal walls of his shelter was ruthless. Every breath he took burned his throat, and his lungs protested against the thin, toxic atmosphere of Vitari 12. But Evan pressed on. He'd survived days alone on this barren rock, and he wasn't about to give up now. The Trivium system wasn't supposed to have been hostile. The meteor storm that had knocked his ship out of the sky came out of nowhere. And now, stuck on an alien planet with no food, limited oxygen, and a spacecraft reduced to a pile of scrap, Evan's situation looked hopeless. Far above, on the sleek observation deck of the Ixera V, alien eyes studied his every move. The Luutons, known across the galaxies for their advanced technologies and biological prowess, had been observing life forms across the universe for centuries. Earth was a new subject of interest, primitive, wild, and full of emotion. The leader of the mission, Zator, watched the humans struggle with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. "How long has it been now?" Zator asked, adjusting the holofeed to focus in on Evan's haggard face. "For Earth days," answered Kuvel, an elder and exopsychologist. "It's illogical that he survived this long. By all calculations, he should have perished 2 days ago. No creature we've encountered possesses this kind of persistence." Down below, Evan was patching another hole in his oxygen tank with strips of cloth torn from his uniform. He hummed softly to himself, a song from his childhood, a lullaby his mother used to sing when he was scared of thunderstorms. The sound of his own voice helped steady his mind, pushing the fear to a corner where he could ignore it. "Come on," he whispered to himself. "They're coming. Just a little longer." Zator observed this peculiar behavior with mounting unease. What is he doing? Does he believe someone will rescue him? Kuvel nodded, intrigued. He does. These creatures possess a remarkable ability called hope. Even in dire situations, they believe in outcomes that defy logic. "That's dangerous," muttered Lonera, a younger scientist. "Hope in the face of impossible odds. It's irrational." "Doesn't he know he's alone?" "Apparently not," Kuvel said thoughtfully. "Or maybe he knows, but he's decided it doesn't matter." Evan's body was at its limit. He hadn't eaten since the crash, and his water supply had run out yesterday. But he clung to his survival with a desperation the Luutons couldn't comprehend. Every time he was on the brink of collapsing, he'd sit back, close his eyes, and breathe deeply, focusing on some distant memory. His gaze was steady, even serene, as if each hardship only reinforced his will. On the 7th day, a sandstorm battered Vitari 12, tearing through the plains and swallowing up everything in its path. The Luuton scientists crowded around the screens, convinced this would be the end of their human experiment. Inside his shelter, Evan held his arms up to protect his face from the stinging sand, his thoughts fixated on the idea of home. He could see his mother's face, hear his father's voice. If he died here, those memories would die too. And somehow, that was more frightening than anything else. "Come on, just keep going," he muttered. "They're out there. They'll find me." When the storm finally died down, Evan's shelter was nearly buried. His oxygen tank was empty, and his skin was raw with burns from the harsh atmosphere. As he lay on the ground, chest heaving, the scientists above him stared in disbelief. "This is no longer just survival," said Lonara softly. "He should be dead." The Luuton's protocol was clear: observe, but never intervene. But Evan's struggle had affected them in ways they hadn't expected. They watched him now, not as subjects of study, but with something akin to empathy. Finally, Kuvel broke the silence. "We're bringing him aboard." Without waiting for approval, a rescue pod was deployed, streaking through Vitari 12's clouds and landing near Evan's battered shelter. Weakly, he lifted his head as the pod's hatch opened, revealing the tall, luminous forms of the Luutons. Their elongated faces and bioluminescent skin were foreign and strange, but Evan felt no fear. "Figured someone would show up," he whispered, half delirious. "You sure took your time." The Luutons gently helped him into the pod, careful not to touch his burned skin. As they lifted him aboard, he smiled up at them with a mixture of relief and defiance. "Knew I'd make it. Just had to hold on a little longer." Back on the Ixera V, Evan was placed in a healing chamber. The Luutons gathered around him, watching his breathing stabilize, his expression calm. As he lay there, a strange silence fell over the alien crew, each of them lost in thought. Zator finally spoke, his voice soft. "We assumed he'd surrender to the conditions. But he fought." Kivel nodded, his eyes shifting to a serene green. "Yes, he survived not because of biology or technology, but because of something we failed to understand. His will," Lonoral whispered, almost reverent. "It's called hope, and perhaps we should have known better than to underestimate it." In that moment, the Luutons understood that they had not simply observed resilience. They had witnessed the triumph of the spirit, something no calculation could ever predict.